Enough is enough. The lies, the deceit, the fear-mongering. Journalists increasingly are feeling empowered to call out the Trump White House's lies because the evidence is right on tape. It made me wonder at the end of a long week, was this a lie too?
I will never lie to you. I will never tell you something I do not believe. I will never put anyone's interests ahead of yours.
That was from the campaign. But this, now, the Trump presidency, this is what a crisis of leadership looks and feels like. Every week, another scandal. Every week, another cover-up. This week, it involved Rudy Giuliani. You see him there on Hannity. He was talking about Stormy Daniels and the payoff and the questions about when she was really paid off and how. When did Trump know? Were laws violated? Oh, and were there other Stormies too? He was on ABC's This Week just a couple hours ago, and he didn't rule it out. This week, I have to admit, I chuckled at some of the banners on screen, some of the headlines calling this a White House credibility crisis. I mean, that is true. That's objectively true. It is a crisis, but it's been true since day one. Reporters are always trained to cover what's new, what's different, what you got, what's happening. But Trump's fibs and falsehoods are the opposite. They're not new. He's been behaving this way his whole life. Heck, Trump entered politics on a lie about President Obama. So what is new? I've been thinking about that, trying to figure out what is new. I think the answer is the reporting. Reporters are revealing Trump's lies one by one. You know, Stormy Daniels made a cameo on SNL last night, but she's only a household name thanks to the reporting by the Wall Street Journal and other outlets. Same for Dr. Harold Bornstein, also parodied by SNL. That's the president's former doctor. NBC got a hold of him recently, and he revealed that his office was, his word, raided by Trump's bodyguard and lawyer. Bornstein then told CNN that his hyperbolic letter attesting to Trump's health back in 2015 was not truthful. Quote, Trump dictated that whole letter. I didn't write that letter. I just made it up as I went along. Let's just sit with that for a minute. Trump attacked Hillary Clinton's health during the campaign, but he made up his own doctor's letter? Enough is enough. Yet there are people out there, a lot of them, who think the press should not be covering the president this way, who say we should not call lies lies.
The journalist shouldn't be the one to say that the president or that his spokesperson is lying, because what that does to 50% of the country is it makes them feel like they're not credible to listen to.
But this shouldn't be about feelings. This should be about facts. Let's bring in someone who has lived through this before. Carl Bernstein, of course, one half of the famed duo that broke the Watergate story wide open. And of course now, Carl, you've been covering the Trump presidency. I've heard you on air saying, follow the money, follow the lies. But how do we keep up with all the lies? How do we know which ones to follow and how to prioritize them?
I think that what we need to do is consider context, which is a big part of the best obtainable version of the truth, in how we report these lies and how we follow the money. And what we judge is important. We have to remember there is an unprecedented investigation going on by a special prosecutor who is looking into the question of whether the President of the United States has knowingly or unknowingly colluded with or been aided by a hostile foreign power during an election. And there are indeed suggestions that keep turning up in these lies by the President of the United States that there may be some truth to those allegations. There may not be. But what's clear is that there is an investigation that needs to go forward, and that the President of the United States and those around him are trying to get the American people and the press and the country and the political system to ignore what really needs to be looked at here and instead conduct a cold civil war against the truth. And all we are interested in here, and should be, is the truth.
But the point I think that Matt Schlapp was trying to make earlier this week is that using the word lies, covering this administration so aggressively, it turns off his fans. Is that a point the press should reckon with? Yeah.
yes, it's a point we should reckon with in terms of there's no need for us to be pejorative. But when a lie is significant, and we know it's significant, and when readers and viewers will recognize it's significant, such as what we've seen in the last week, particularly around Michael Cohen, around Stormy Daniels, there is relevance to that. And people are smart enough to know that these are lies when it's pointed out by the press. But I don't think we need to engage every moment in saying, liar, 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 your pants are on fire. I think what we need to do is keep advancing the story wherever it leads, whether it's exculpatory of President Trump or whether, as seems to be the case, he is becoming deeper and deeper enmeshed in the question of collusion. And that is perhaps why, in the context of what we're reporting, we see more lying about everything from the President of the United States. And the most extraordinary thing, we keep talking about Rudy Giuliani, because he is now front and center, and what he has done, unlike any of the president's surrogates, is to picture the President of the United States as almost a grifter, with no interest in anything but conning the American people, with saying, as he said today, oh yeah, there might be more Stormy Daniels, there might be more hush payments. It's extraordinary what Giuliani is saying in the picture he, not the press, is presenting of a President of the United States who is totally unconcerned with truth, especially about this question of whether the Russians have interfered in our electoral campaigns, and he was a knowing or unknowing participant in what they were doing.
Yeah, what we see instead from the Giulianis of the world is a lot of projection. He'll say it's the Democrats that are colluding. Let me show you a few examples of this, how Trump and his supporters respond to media critiques. The first I noticed was on Monday of this week. CNN was reporting that Chief of Staff John Kelly had privately called the president unhinged at one point. Then 45 minutes later, after CNN reported that, Trump said the press is unhinged. Coincidence? I don't know. Later in the week, all week long, coverage of the president's lack of credibility, calling it a crisis. And then on Saturday, where did Fox go? You guessed it, the media. The media has a credibility crisis. That's the banner there on screen. And, you know, another story, a story you were mentioned, you talked about, Carl. It's a Wall Street Journal scoop on Friday that the U.S. was probing Michael Cohen over cash he built up during the campaign, that he had taken out lines of credit to secure access to what, as much as $774,000. Here's how you reacted to that breaking news on Friday.
This has, from the Wall Street Journal account, all the appearances of a campaign slush fund.
And you're not the only one saying it. I see a lot of slush fund headlines on the web. So I don't think it's a coincidence this morning on Fox and Friends, the Trump fans Diamond and Silk were saying maybe the White House Correspondents Association is a slush fund. It's projection 101. We see it time and time again from the president and his supporters. I suppose there's not a lot the press can do about that except try to point it out.
I wouldn't even bother to point it out. I think that, that there are times to engage in the press and there are times to let something go. And that's one of them, to let go and just do the story. Follow the money, follow the lies. But I think what we need to keep in mind here is what this is about. We now have seen how Donald Trump has succeeded to a large extent, understanding the country much better perhaps than the press. Did by lying, by making the conduct of the press the issue instead of his own conduct and that of the Russians and what he and the Russians may or may not have done in concert, that he is succeeding in making our conduct the issue to a large extent. It appeals to his base. His base has put the Republican Party in thrall and fear of this president and this presidency. And one of the things we ought to be covering is whether or not the Republican Party is in such thrall that it is willing to give the President of the United States a pass on the question of whether or not he's acted in concert with a foreign power and undermine the interest of the United States as a candidate. That's what this story is about underneath it all. And the Republicans continue to understand that he has gotten the country to go along with his demagogic vision of who we are. He has appealed, as all presidents do, to opposition to the press at one time or another, but he has realized that by stoking that fear over and over and over again and crying, witch hunt, witch hunt, witch hunt, witch hunt, that we will take our eyes off the big story and instead engage with him bit by bit, tit for tat. That's not what we ought to be doing. We need to be advancing this story as the Wall Street Journal, owned by Rupert Murdoch, friend of Donald Trump. It is hugely significant that the Wall Street Journal has broken one story after another about the president, his lying, his slush funds, all the rest, with his lawyer, supposed lawyer, his fixer, Mr. Cohen, who is at the center of all this right now, who was the glue, who can give us real answers about perhaps collusion, about financial arrangements that seem to be perhaps illegal, that have broken laws. Look, we've got a big story to be covering. We're covering it very well, except when we get into the tit-for-tat trenches with the President of the United States. We need to keep our eye on the big picture, and that includes covering the Republican Party, because during Watergate, which really is, there's huge differences between Watergate and what we're seeing here, but there is one similarity, and that is trying to make the conduct of the press the issue. And what the press did in Watergate is it kept covering the story. The cover-up unraveled, the facts became known, and partly because Republicans who were in and willing to engage in a bipartisan investigation, as they are not now, were swayed by the facts. And I think if we keep our nose to the grindstone and keep reporting the facts as we're doing, there will be no choice eventually but the Republicans, if they want to remain a viable party in the United States, are going to have to say, look, the facts are adding up in a really ugly way, which they are so far. And I go back to that picture that Rudy Giuliani is painting of our President of the United States as almost a grifter, a con man, not somebody worthy of respect, not someone who speaks honestly, but rather somebody who's looking for the nearest cover-up or cover story. And it's Rudy Giuliani who's picturing him that way effectively, not the press.